Have you ever felt deep within that there's something more you're supposed to be doing, but you're not sure what? Have you ever felt like you're producing a lot, but not expressing at all? Welcome to She Made It. I'm your host, Elle Zimmerman, and I am on a mission to help you cultivate meaning through the path of creativity. Join me to eavesdrop on conversations with brave women who broke through their resistances into a life of authenticity. Because I believe if she made it, you can too.
Hi, everybody. I know a few of you are still popping on, but we're really excited to have you here for our first ever She Made It Live virtual. So you'll have to bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. This is the first time we've done this on Zoom webinar, but we're super excited that we're still able to bring the She Made It Live experience to you in spite of the strange and socially distanced world that we are all living in. So thank you so much for being here. I am Clara Molson. I have the honor of working with Elle and also being the co-host for She Made It, which is a joy and so much fun to get to listen in on the stories of women who have found out what it means for them to step into their authentically creative life. And before I bring Elle on, I just want to tell you a little bit about her and what she does. Elle is an actress turned entrepreneur. She's a creativity coach. Obviously, she's the host of the podcast She Made It, and she is a master at helping women step into their authentic life purpose, and also beyond that, helping people expand their thought leader platform and their influence. So I would like to welcome on Elle Zimmerman.
Did the magic work? I'm here. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Clara, for that welcome. And again, yes, this is here because we're also recording this live for an episode of She Made It. And this is sort of a special event because the guest that we have today was scheduled to do a live event. We were going to do it at her office. She's a licensed therapist, and we had a beautiful event scheduled around Kinsakuroi, which she'll share a little bit about. But obviously, the world halted, and we had to change our plans, and so we pivoted, like so many of us have done over the last couple months, and we pivoted to bring her to this virtual experience with a little bit of a different topic, knowing that she's in the trenches of mental health, helping people navigate all sorts of trauma, all sorts of anxiety and experiences that they're going through, particularly in this time. So she was just the perfect fit for our first live.
Yeah. And Elle, we've been getting a lot of good feedback, I know, on the name. Did you want to share a little bit about how this name came to you for our event today?
Yeah, so the revolution starts within. I guess a couple places it came from. I just finished a production up in Dayton of Gloria, A Life, which is the story of Gloria Steinem. And it was a biopic about her, and the theme that ran throughout the play was that a revolution starts face to face. It starts by sharing our stories, listening to each other, and then doing our part in making a change in the world. But it starts from within in those intimate conversations. And then I also happened to see a post on Instagram, which I'm just going to read. And, we've all dealt with COVID-19 and all the transition and pivot that came from that. But then we also, just as the world started to shift into the next normal, we had the all of the Black Lives Matter issues and the brutality against African Americans and the protesting. And so there was a post on Instagram that really resonated with me that was also part of the inspiration. A friend of mine posted, "Some are posting on social media, some are protesting in the streets, some are donating silently, some are educating themselves. Some are having tough conversations with friends and family. A revolution has many lanes. Be kind to yourself and to others who are traveling in the same direction. Just keep your foot on the gas." And I just love that because I was having a lot of those difficult conversations with my 3 kids around the table and processing a lot of what has been going on. And so it just really resonated in my conversation with Sharon, just made it make so much sense for our audiences.
Yeah,
you want to
I
introduce
love that post too.
Yeah.
So without further ado, we want to get into Sharon's interview. I'll just tell you a little bit about Sharon and she can tell the rest of her story herself, but she is the owner and founder of Kinsaku Roy Counseling. And she has a really interesting pivot story from what she studied in for her college degree to what she does now. She's lived internationally. She's a creative and intuitive soul who really loves helping people find wholeness and healing in their life. And I think that she is just going to help us navigate these tumultuous emotional waters that are 2020. So welcome, Sharon.
Thank you for that warm welcome. Glad to be here.
Yay! So it worked again. So magic, you like pop up. So here you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another little side note about Sharon, she and I met several years ago because we were actually in the same neighborhood right before you left for Singapore, right?
That was our first jump around the globe. We were heading actually to China for a couple years then, and it was us packing up our 4 kiddos and all of our belongings to move from that nice big house in the suburbs to a teeny tiny apartment in the middle of a city of 17 million people. So that was quite a pivot.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And so the goal of She Made It is to share like a woman's entrepreneurial journey. Sometimes it's a transition story. It may be a next step, but it's all sort of centered around creativity at the heart of the experience, whether it's creativity that becomes a business or creativity that just kind of fuels who you are as a person. And we love to share the journey, not just the she made it part, the arrival part. And I know that you started out as a classical pianist major, right?
That's right.
A performance major.
Yeah. Great. I was the middle of 7 kids and music was part of the vein of our family. And so it was a really natural thing when it came time to study in college that piano was going to be my major. So I had lots of support from family to do this thing in music. Love that creative piece and how that's been a thread throughout the journey. That's right. Yeah.
So how does a classical pianist end up now a licensed therapist?
Yeah, and all the years in between, right? So
yeah.
My journey, if you think about kind of the path you lay and taking that next best step or the leap to something completely new and different. My husband and I were married young. I always had a studio, was teaching piano even when we were living abroad. I had a small studio there for the community and really felt fulfilled in that regard. We had 4 small kiddos. And it was really through this journey of walking alongside others who were navigating difficult transitions. We moved from the suburbs into a multicultural experience where we actually were the minority and formed community around us. And I struggled really, really a lot in that transition. And it was in that journey through that story, we were as prepared as we could be for this big transition in our lives as my husband made the move from like a corporate position to spend some time giving back and working with a nonprofit. And, you know, it all sounded really good. We were ready to go. And yet the support that was needed to sustain our family and to sustain what life was for us really took a turn. And so it was in that moment where I realized, hey, there is more that I'm needing than I actually have access to. And finding those resources, finding the support, finding the tools took me into a counseling office for the first time in my journey. And really learning that there's a lot of good reasons why when we lose our footing, we really have a need for support in ways that maybe we didn't before, right? I had what I needed to live life in the suburbs in one city, and transplanting that young mom with her 4 kids into a different culture, it was beyond my capacity. And so it really was a journey of learning about myself, of learning about my family, learning about a new culture, that really took me on that road to become the person that everyone would say, you need to go talk to Sharon. You should go talk to Sharon, because I was pretty transparent with that.
Yeah, you were kind of that way even before you
Was
left,
I?
though. You're a nurturer. You are very in tune with people and great listener. So I think it's also part of just how you're wired. Yeah, yeah.
There is that element. I think being in the middle of seven, I have a sibling that recalls very vividly the lecture of, we're going to all be together for a while, so we might as well get along. So that's part of this thread of the story, right? Of understanding relationships, understanding the significance of connection, understanding how we move towards and away from each other, that really has become this journey for me. And so where that has led is a couple moves back and forth across the globe, an expat, not an expert, but I have a good lens and an understanding of what it means to transition into something new, something completely unknown, with the different roles and hats that we play, and just showing up in the here and now.
And all the while you were doing it as a mother with 4 young children. So you're also kind of the flight attendant of the experience, trying to make sure everybody else is doing well.
That's right. And that was another really big pivotal moment, was the reality of learning what I heard so often on those airplane rides back and forth across the globe, sometimes with me with the 4 kids alone, was that message of the significance of applying the oxygen mask to your own face and mouth before administering it to others. And that really becoming a mantra of realizing, you know what, there is a lot here. We can worry so much about taking care of what's happening around us that we become really disoriented to what we're needing in the here and now for ourselves. And I think that permeates even in this time that we're in right now. What does it look like for us, in how we move into that space? So for sure, I'm learning that and administering that. I haven't snuck an oxygen mask in my bag yet, but I'm trying to make friends with a flight attendant who could get me one, because I'm a real visual person in that.
I love that. Yeah. And I know this is, we didn't, because we talked a little bit before our time today, and there was one story that, if you could share it quickly, you shared with us in another event we did together, about a trip you took where you ended up like missing the diaper bag. And
that was a really fun story. And I can say that now. We survived, and my son survived. He's now 12 and is thriving. But we were living in China, and we're leading a group of kiddos to an Inner Mongolia, which is where we led an English camp. And the day before we were leaving, there was a major renovation that was to be done at our apartment complex. And little did I know that it meant all of the things I had packed and laid out so nicely and neatly to remember to bring the next day was going to be completely covered in tarps. And for me, I'm very much out of sight, out of mind. I knew I had my people. I knew I had what I needed to get on the train, but my poor little guy had no diapers, no diaper bag, nothing, as we're venturing on a really long train ride through the countryside of China. And again, that's a place where my need exceeded what I was able to provide. And the gift of community, the gift of others that came alongside, diapers that showed up, at random stops, or we still have the little Ukrainian dolls that were his only toy on that adventure. So we definitely had quite a pivot in that moment.
Yeah, so it's not just pivoting; it's the creative problem solving. It's like, like with COVID-19, I've heard people explain it like you're attacked by an army, and so what do? You just have to brace yourself, look around, get your bearings, and then decide how to act. You're blindsided, but you have to access your creativity and intuition. And before we get to that stuff, though, I'd love to hear how you came to the name Kinsaku-Roy.
Oh yeah, sure. So we lived in Singapore, and in that journey, in that part of our story, I was working with an organization. I still do consulting with an organization called Parakaleo, and that group brings together women from all over. This was the first time that we had brought a group of women nationally together, internationally, to come through our training. And we often share about stories of beauty and stories of brokenness, stories of how does it start, what went wrong, how does it get fixed, how does it end, and kind of really engage in the beautiful parts and in the painful parts. And through this lens, we were engaging women from multiple countries and wondering, how is this going to translate? Because this was the first time we were doing an event with multiple cultures represented. And there was a sweet Japanese friend who was there. And as soon as we were talking about the impact of the shatter, the impact of when shalom was shattered, or when this tragic intrusion of the fall is how we kind of phrase that, was described, her face lit right up, and she said, "It's kintsukuroi." And I said, "It's a what?"
That's what I said.
It's kintsukuroi. And she described to me that art of golden repair, the art of something being shattered and broken and then being restored. And it's in that place to be made more beautiful, in the brokenness, with strength and with beauty and with a story to be told. So it's not discarded. It's not thrown out. It's not wasted. It's refined and made more beautiful. And fast forward to me opening up my practice, I have a very encouraging husband who, when I mentioned the possibility and the idea of trying to find the right name, this name just always stuck with me. Like, this is the work that's done in holding that space to do the work of repair in some of those places where we're repairing shattered hearts, relationships, stories, places that feel so broken. I said, "What do you think about the name Kintsukuroi?" And he must have liked it, because before I knew it, I had an LLC and a bank account and things coming in the mail. So I think my idea took off, and he tends to be the let's do it. And I say, okay, here we go. So
yeah,
that's kind of the name. Yeah.
And it definitely, it tells a story, and the story invites us into who you are and what you, as now a therapist, offer others. So it's a beautiful bridge. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a felt experience. I really like if you were to come into the office, you would see a picture on the wall of what looks like a shattered piece of art, but it's carefully kind of put together with some of that gold and some of those other pieces. So it's really represented. It was really important to me to create a space that people might think, okay, what is this? Where am I? But as soon as they walk in the doors, there's this exhale, a sense of, okay, like permission to be right where I am, a work in progress. And that's really experienced and is felt viscerally in what my hope is, this space that is the Kintsukuroi office. Yeah.
Yeah. And you are sort of finding your niche in the real extreme trauma, the real distressed situations, would you say?
Yeah. So my specialty, my focus really is on relationships and those that have experienced, brokenness, who are maybe unsure, couples who are maybe not sure where to go next. You've maybe tried everything and nothing seems to work, and we're really missing each other in the places where we just get lost and stuck. And so what I really come alongside couples, primarily individuals as well, who are really struggling to make sense of their own story in the context of relationship. And so I like to say I triage really intense. I'm not afraid to jump into those difficult relational spaces and help not only provide the oxygen masks to those I'm caring for, but to just be that presence of reminding them they're not alone. And part of that process is walking through creating a sense of safety and making sense of what can feel like really overwhelming situations. And normally it's transitions, it's life, it's really, really good things that we do in our stories that sometimes turn us upside down before we even realize it. And we can lose our way, we can lose each other in that. And so that's kind of my hope is to provide that space for clarity, for confidence, for just that sense of hope and healing, regardless of where each individual ends up, that they will experience wholeness in that.
Yeah. And so that really perfectly transitions us into sort of like the meat of what we want to talk about today. When we first were going to do the She Made It Live, we were going to, which I think we're still going to do in the future, we were going to give everybody the opportunity to do the experience of, it's called kintsuku, it's called something different, right?
So you can say kintsugi. Kintsugi is also, there's two ways of saying it. The kintsuku roi is the actually translated golden repair, and kintsugi is the art form of it. So the translation of it is similar. So yes, if you've seen kintsugi, it's the exact same concept. See?
Yeah, so we were going to do kintsugi, right?
Yeah.
So we were going to do kintsugi, which we probably will still do, where we actually get to take a piece of pottery or
yes,
I guess glass or what.
I have them ready to go. They're here and ready, and have it because it's really experiential.
Yeah.
Taking something that it's really hard, walking through this process of intention, like you're intentionally breaking something that feels like it shouldn't be broken, and yet journeying through, and what is that evoking in us, right? It's this experiential process.
Yeah.
Knowing what is this going to bring up, and really paying attention and slowing down, because it takes time to walk through that art of piecing it back together.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said earlier, it's like we had that shatter happen in all of our lives.
For sure.
It's like the world stopped and we had to make changes and regroup. And so and you and I spoke a couple weeks ago, or even probably a month ago, and we were kind of chatting about what are the conversations that you're having with people now? Like, what is that experience of trauma? Some people experienced quarantine and stay at home as an opening up, as this opportunity to explore and slow down. And some people, it was total distress and total trauma. And we're watching it on the news and we're taking it in, even if we're not experiencing it directly. I guess, what sort of conversations have you been having with people?
Absolutely. Oh, you're really getting it there. There's this sense of we're taking it in all of our senses, experiencing it through those that we're seeing on the media, those that are close to us, watching it. I like to say it's like the silent tsunami that started and has made its ripple effect across the globe. We're all in this heightened sense of alert. We don't know what we don't know. So when safety measures are taken and quarantines were kind of reinforced at various degrees and at various levels, there's our felt safety, that safety that we feel feels threatened. It feels like we're experiencing, in a way that we don't have really a language for, this ambiguous, vicarious trauma as we're watching mass numbers of people infected around the globe, and also wondering, how is this going to impact us here? What does it look like for us to really take those necessary steps? And it almost then becomes like a moral issue, where whether we wear a mask or we don't wear a mask, or how we are polarizing, we become very polarized in those positions based upon kind of those experiences, or what that is or isn't communicating to others. So we're all being really careful in some ways to know, how am I supposed to show up here? This doesn't feel like anything we've experienced, because it's not. It's very abnormal, and calling it that this is a significant shared experience globally that we're all kind of circling around together to try to make sense of something that feels like we're still trying to understand. So it brings a lot of ambiguity. It brings a lot of, I don't know how to be in relation to other. I remember going on a walk and moving towards a neighbor, forgetting that, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be socially distant. Like, even saying that feels so wrong, because I'm all about connection and wanting to be that safe space to move towards others. So even realizing I could be a threat by my movement felt very visceral to me.
Yeah, and just the after so much social distancing, just the lack of connection, what the lack of physical touch. It's the one, like, not wanting to get in someone's space, but then what am I missing, and not even realizing that I'm being depleted, or that it's got this indirect sort of like underlying effect on me. It's like, and then of course you've got the opening up of our world into what I call the next normal. And then we had all the riots and the unjust,
The death of George Floyd, which was very publicly, I think what's really hard is that there's so much happening right now that this is not new. Like there's we've never experienced this trauma before, like the pandemic. And yet I think that the social issues and cultural concerns that are now, like, it's almost like we're collectively as a whole, we've experienced this situation that is so unprecedented. And yet these civic and cultural issues that we're looking and seeing now as a result of this wave of civil unrest and people moving in and wanting to speak up, that's not a new thing. It's just can sometimes simmer. We don't really know what to do with it, how to engage. It might bubble up with the public, like it did within George Floyd's death in that space, but it's not new, like this undertow that kind of pulls us in. And I think what is different this time is there's a collective whole, like looking and watching and wanting to know how to move, how to be present in this place. And what does that look like for us? I think there's a lot of question, like we don't know what to do or how to move.
Right. And I remember thinking or talking with someone about how COVID-19, we were all on the same side. We were all, as a world, experiencing the same thing. And then we're all sort of suppressed. We're being kind of socially controlled through mandates to stay home. And then this total horrific, completely just so I mean, I don't even have words for it, how horrific it was to see the experience with George Floyd. And then there was this massive revolt. And then there's, like you said, I don't know what to do. I feel so deeply the experience, but I don't know what to do. And I feel like I'm part of the problem in some way. And that's a question that I've talked with a lot of women about, like, what do we do? What do I do? What can I do? I'm afraid to say something. I'm afraid, so I guess that would be a great question that I'd love to ask you.
Absolutely. Like, what can we do? How do we engage this difficult space when we have no words, when we are aware or awake in a way that we haven't been in the past, or experiencing it in this new space? Because it is coming on the tails where we are very hyper alert and sensitive to one another in those places of need. And so I think for me, what that's looked like is kind of paying attention to what's going on inside of me. What is it that I'm experiencing? What is this bringing up? As I think about my own story, my own family of origin, we grew up, in a neighborhood that there was this encoded space within it was not safe to go around the block alone. And it was a community that was in the inner city in Washington, D.C. And so I think for me, kind of feeling there's trauma that's stored even within us as we look around, and those threads that run, safe or not safe, right? Am I safe? Am I not safe? I have no reason now experientially, to feel some of that unrest or that tension when I'm sitting across from a beautiful person of color across from me. And yet those early memories, early stories of it's not safe to go around the block. Am I safe? Am I not safe? I almost can sometimes feel shame over questioning, like, where am I in relation to the world? And it's through conversations, hard conversations with other trusted friends, other beautiful women of color who are close friends, that I can engage in and actually move towards and say, what do I do with this? Like, there's this underlying visceral feeling that can fuel this lack of safety. And yet here's a beautiful friendship who has offered me, a safe place to be, a restorative connection, and the ability to lean in and not expect that friend or that person to take care of or to educate me, because there are so many resources that have been out there to talk about this tension, the way in which our culture is established, and making that space to be a listener, to be a student, to admit that we didn't know what we didn't know, that there's more than what we can just see on the surface, and grieve. I think there's a lot of grief associated with that.
Yeah.
So as we navigate our journey, as we walk alongside with our kiddos, as we're being vulnerable in places that feel uncomfortable, it's really about, we want to move so much to what do I do? What do I do with this? That we can really miss tending to having empathy for ourselves, having empathy for another, sharing that space within and between us. To catch our breath like I'm doing right now, right? To slow down, to make sense of what I'm experiencing because of my story, because of the road I've journeyed. I know what it feels to be a minority living in a culture where I am the minority. And yet even there, the color of my skin gave me privilege. Even there was a sense of this is something felt and experienced. And having to wrestle through that, my kids having to wrestle through that. And so I think that that's a big piece of it, wanting to know what is it that we can do starts with that looking inward and looking and seeing our own impact in ourselves.
Yeah, so last weekend, we were out doing yard work and we heard a yell, and Curtis ran over and realized that the neighbor's house was on fire, like full on flames blazing out the front door, the windows, like major fire. So he screamed fire. I called 911. It felt like 20 minutes. It took 5 minutes. It was like a 7-alarm fire. We had fire trucks from all over the whole area. And we stood there and we watched the house go down in flames. And not completely to the ground, but it was like 2 hours of watching the firefighters, and the homeowner was with us. And my daughter, toward the end of it, said, I feel really bad to go home and have dinner. And I asked her more to help me, to have her articulate it. And it was the sense of survivor's guilt. It was I get to go home and have dinner, and they don't, and they never get to go home and have dinner. And so I know that a lot of us are experiencing, that survivor's guilt, that I feel bad it's not affecting me worse, or I feel bad I'm not being impacted. And so it's almost even more paralyzing, like not only feeling the sort of lack of what do I do next, but then a little bit of the guilt of not having quite the same amount of suffering. But then there's this even larger sense of existential dread, this looming over us that the world feels like it's just crashing into a wall right now. And then how do you go through the day-to-day with that looming dread?
Well, it can almost take you out, right? It does take us out. It takes our breath away. It takes, again, that felt sense of safety. That could be me. What if that were me? Oh, that is someone I care about, who I've maybe interacted with or not within my story, but we can start to really kind of put that lens on it. And it's this traumatized vicariously by just seeing it. So even the graphic images that are shared on Facebook, or that, like, can you believe this? We're being so inundated with those images that we can't help, like within our biology, we are wired to feel with and alongside others. It's part of the mirror neurons of how we are created. And so that sense of sadness and loss, it's like, how do we sit with that, knowing it's not ours to carry, and yet it is impacting another, and that our level of engagement or our story is significant, that we each are carrying in our own ways with our own kiddos. I've got a kiddo that, is a senior that graduated this year in 2020, a freshman in college, and that disruption for them, what grief looked like within those first few weeks of shutdown, came out in a lot of different ways. And when we were able to identify it as, this is grief, this is a sadness that things aren't the way that we thought, those expectations of the way things were, or that we would want them to be. And so being able to name that for us to create that space to look around and see, okay, how am I being impacted by this? What's going on in my own story, in my own body? And how am I then able to move towards another right here around me, to offer that care and connection, eye contact, because a hug isn't able to be given right now. But even there's this, do we look? Do we not look? Are we wearing our masks? Like, how are we supposed to show up here, right? When our visceral response is to want to be present.
Right. And if we're so overwhelmed with that heaviness, do you have any tips for how to take care of ourselves? And I will just interject really quickly. So I have a friend who she works in the news, and she shared with me just today, and I thought this was really valuable to share, that it's not just the experiences that we're experiencing, the images that we're seeing, but it's the vocabulary that we're using. It's like the words have changed. Social distancing, riots, Black Lives Matter, and they're all coming at us in a way that we're physically feeling it, we're visually seeing it, and then our vocabulary has changed. How do you kind of break yourself to give yourself space to either sit in it, heal through it, navigate through it, pick a lane to be, an activist in?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. It's really helpful because it gives some meat to, okay, so now I'm feeling it, I'm experiencing it. What do I do with it? Right. I love, especially with the She Made It, thinking about what is the creative way in which the unique gifts and story of who I am will be used in an expression back into either my community or in my relationships or in this place. And knowing that we each have a unique voice, a unique story, and the permission to slow down, which feels really counterintuitive when we're wanting to move into action, but to really slow down, to check in with ourselves, to understand, get curious about what's going on for me. Like, what might be some of those areas that maybe are being activated because I haven't engaged in a conversation that was uncomfortable, or I haven't moved in a direction that I now know that I should. And so there's that loss of maybe time that has been lost, and having permission to grow and permission to take on a different lens. I was just talking to a mentor tonight who was even sharing that same thing. Like, we don't know what we didn't know. And it's this lack of awareness, but we are always in process. And I think that's what I'm hearing from my friends of color, is this permission to be curious, ask the questions, that I didn't realize how harsh the silence was. Mm. And yet the silence isn't necessarily just silent on social media, but the silence in those people they're close to, not moving towards them in a way that would be with an empathic expression, or just not acknowledging that this is here in the room and being that presence.
And do you mean silence now, or do you mean the silence, the cultural silence?
I think the cultural silence, and even that invitation to move towards. And it goes back, I love in the work I do with couples and relationships, and knowing how we move towards and how we move away really communicates a lot. Like this sense of, it's not from a lack of caring often that we get stuck in these patterns of like relating, but we become so habituated to, this is just the dance we do, that actually the brain pays attention to a new experience. And so I think what we're all experiencing here is this, oh wait, this is something new. This feels different for some reason. And I'm hearing that over and over again. Like the voices of those that are moving towards, corporations who are speaking up in ways they haven't, waves that are coming through that says we're all standing in this together, whether I'm having a one-on-one conversation with someone, whether I'm speaking here on a blog, on a podcast, whether I'm creating a piece of art that's going to be an expression of what's going on for me. We can shame ourselves for not doing enough, or be stuck and frozen in that place, as opposed to looking at ourselves with kindness and with others with that sense of empathy. Like there's enough empathy to go around as we're like able to get to that place of seeing through the lens of another, experiencing story, being curious about one another's story and not assuming we know, because that's even just self-protective. So I think that's a really helpful thing to say what tools we can use, is kind of slow down, breathe, because that helps us kind of find our center, find our ability to actually respond instead of just react in the moment to what feels like distress.
I feel like another thing that I can catch myself in, just like a negative thought pattern, is that I'm not doing the right thing. Like I'm seeing all the pictures of protesting and I feel bad saying this. That's not really my thing. I'm more going to have a conversation that might be with my children, or I might read a book or reach out to a friend of color, but I'm not going to be loud and bold and big about it. And that feels then like I'm not doing enough. Like, how do I rest in? So yeah, I'm dealing with the trauma coming at me. And then there's I want to be in action. And is my action good enough?
Is it good enough? And is it good enough? Like, am I looking at it as being enough? Or is someone else that's looking in going to say, wow, they really saw me move in a way that really impacted culture. Yeah. I see, Elle, this invitation. I mean, even your reach for me to say, hey, we're pivoting here and this is really important. What a beautiful gift for you to use that platform. I think this is exactly what it's about. It's exactly about showing up in that unique way that we are, in the unique way that we're created to do the work that only we can do, right? Without fear of getting it wrong, because guess what? We will get it wrong. We're going to misstep. I always tell even my couples or individuals who are walking through finding new ways of being, I'm like, the important thing is you're out on the dance floor doing new steps to a dance, right? We can get so stuck in knowing this is the way it always is that we just decide we're going to get off the dance floor. But the reality is it takes new muscles, it takes new practice, it takes time to develop what does it look like to be in this space and to be in it collectively together, knowing that we are enough, knowing that our silence can sometimes come from that paralyzing fear of getting it wrong, and that there's so much more within that's being invited out. I think I have a wise friend, her name's LaShonda Sugg, and she works locally and does a lot of trauma-informed care with the Labors of Love. And has a very, her platform now is that she's being asked to come in and speak at corporate levels, specifically to this topic of how do we do things differently. And her invitation as a friend of mine, as I was wrestling with these questions with her, was that invitation to do your own work, right? Like, she's like, take a minute, telling me the same kind of things I'm sharing with you. Yeah. Take time to do your own work, make sense of that, have that heart reflection, and then look 6 feet out from where you are, look around you and say, who is my audience? Where is my sphere? How can I walk alongside those that are there and use that platform to really make that difference? Yeah.
Yeah. You also shared something about the conversation with her, if you don't mind me asking, and it falls into, and you mentioned it about it's not safe to go around the corner, but that the psychology of prejudice or bias.
Like this felt sense of safety, feeling threatened, that it's just can be so wired in us.
Right.
That it's felt and experienced before it's not even actually a realized threat. And
yeah, like it'll happen to me. I'll even use just a man walking down a street and a man larger than me approaches and my body tightens up. I grab my purse a little tighter and it's happening almost without my realization.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the the body's natural way to protect self. And it goes back to that felt sense of safety, feeling threatened. And it's a really good thing because it does keep us safe and it pushes us into, my safety is threatened. I'm needing to run. And I think sometimes with those misaligned messages or these things that we don't even realize maybe have become acquainted with color of skin or populations of those that are associated with some of those, I'm not safe in this particular environment, can be so intrinsically encoded in us. And I think that's what we're seeing so much now is this, the impact of, we don't even know how we're responding in those moments sometimes, but until all of a sudden it's like, wait, why did I just, and then there's shame over responding in that way. Right. And so part of it is just that reframing of knowing my body's doing this thing. There's a reason why even me acknowledging with this friend, this precious friend, like it was almost a confession of sorts. Like, this is this part of me I feel shame over that I still sometimes feel like I'm needing to brace myself. And I know it's not real. It's not when I'm experiencing a real threat. And so it was a gift to be able to speak that out in a safe place with a safe person, and have that be an opportunity, not for them to have to care for me, but to realize, yes, there is more work to be done, that us as a culture, as a society, geographically, wherever we go, like the desire for us to really see and know and care for one another from a place of a sense of belonging, and holding one another, as Carl Rogers says, with this unconditional positive regard. It sounds really, really good. And if we've experienced trauma, if we are associated with these negative messages coming at us, we're almost like predisposed to brace for what is, am I safe? Am I not safe? Which leads to a lot and a lot of over the top responses, a lot of what fuels some of these negative Facebook, interactions that we see where you think, oh my goodness, what's happening? We're all taking that reactive, responding with really strongly held beliefs, but really missing the message of seeing and hearing and being present for another in that place.
We've practiced that around our dinner table a lot. Some of those, blah, okay, everybody calm down.
For sure. Down. Well, I always say travel is like marriage strengthening exercises for me and my husband, and my kids all know walking through security, my felt sense of safety is always through the roof. Doesn't matter which customs line we're in or what airport it is. My kids look like, Mom, we're almost through. So they know we all have the thing that's like, this goes with, that stored memory that we don't even maybe realize is there. Well, the beautiful gift is that our minds and our bodies are made to heal and to be restored, which is why I love this idea of kintsukuroi and this idea of that there is more beauty to be seen, that there is the gift in sharing story, that there is a way through, but it often comes with emptying and being willing to slow down, being willing to embrace ambiguity and the unknowns, which are all beautiful skills that we've had to learn through COVID, right? Yeah. Embracing ambiguity, embracing the unknown, being curious more than certain about what's the end of the 2020 is going to bring us.
And knowing with good intentions that we still might make a mistake.
Correct. Absolutely.
And being
honest with that, because we're human, right? There's this, I know I'm not gonna get it right, but I care enough to be willing to get it wrong. Mm-hmm. Right. And that motive of like, hey, I can take that next best step for me. And having permission to look through at another with that lens of inviting them to do the same and spurring one another on in courage and in connection instead of competition or shame. Yeah. And I think that's, I like to say, light a candle and let's just kind of sit and be curious about what that's going to look like, because it's not comfortable to engage in that space. Yeah.
So Sharon, what I'd love to do, and Clara, maybe you can help me. I'd love to ask participants if they have any questions for Sharon. You can use your chat feature. We have about 10 minutes, and I'd love to take a couple questions. And while we wait to see if questions are coming in, I have some. Well, I guess I have some fun little questions that I want to ask you, but before we do that, and as we wait for some questions to come in from our attendees, is there anything else from our conversations before this that you would like to share? I know that we talked about a lot of different things.
I think the significance of our life is lived in stories, that this is a chapter of a story, a chapter of the journey, like embracing the here and now place that we are, and kind of being really mindful of living in this moment, in this place, whether we are, you know, I think for some, you touched on it earlier, where some people had found this time to be super healing, to have space and time to process and be present more fully in ways that maybe they haven't. And for others, it has felt like I'm running on a treadmill and that treadmill stopped and there's just a lot of impact and pain. And so even in that, like the fact that each of us are in a different storyline with the people around us and in our own journey, I think that one of the things that really stands out is to really have that warm, positive regard for self and a gracious understanding, to have permission, right, to be right where you are, without shaming each other in that place. So
I shared on a podcast during COVID that uncertainty is harder than knowing you're approaching something really negative. Like if I know something negative is coming, it's like I think it was a haunted house analogy. If I know around the corner there's going to be a big witch jump out at me, that's easier than not knowing what's around the corner. And we're all experiencing uncertainty. And so I guess, I don't know, that to me is the unifying theme of the experience.
There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear in the unknown. And so that bracing for impact as opposed to being open to what the possibilities are, it feels really polarizing. So I love, there's a question that did just come through I can see about, is it wrong to be excited about the changes happening? I feel that there's a lot of healing. I think that is a beautiful question. I love that you're asking that. When I think about that, how did it start? What went wrong? How does it get fixed? And how does this end? We're made to look for that like cliffhanger. Like there's a lot in this storyline right now, lots of different threads, lots of different themes, to say that we are wired as well to look for redemption, to look for the goodness that can come from these broken places.
And maybe this is the shattering.
Yeah.
This is the time of shattering for the kintsugi.
That's right. That's exactly right. So not wrong at all. Like to feel this excitement, this underwhelm of something is different. Like this is the pain of change. And it makes me teary because it doesn't feel wrong at all. It feels like for us to embrace the shatter and to see what does it look like to move into something new. Something new is being born here, and holding that space for each other. Is really positive.
Do you see the other question?
Yeah. So I hate how politicized this whole situation is, and feeling like if you differ from the media perspective, you're bad or wrong. How do we navigate that? Oh, that's such a great question. That polarization of black and white, all or nothing. It goes back to almost that shaming response that I said, we can sit in this place of, if I do this, then I'm going to be perceived in that way. And so I think being able to name it, being able to separate ourselves from it, we can become so politically tied to positions that becomes the thing that's most true about us without even realizing that we then miss seeing people, seeing humanity, seeing each other in ways that are really, really impactful. And so I think sitting in that and naming it like, oh, this is one of those places that I'm feeling the rub of different.
And the media, I mean, we have such an interesting political climate right now on top of all this. Sure. And so there's very polarizing media. And are you aligned with the good or the bad in views of the politicians today?
That's right. Well, and I think we can get so lost in all the things. And sometimes there's so many things that can cloud our vision. My invitation is always to kind of distill that down and to sit across from another. It's easy to have this out there to talk about them, to talk about, other than me. And yet when you sit across from and engage even in a conversation with someone who has a differing view, a different opinion, and see them fully, with that emptying posture of empathy and understanding, and knowing that we can respond and react out of our own stuff, we can come at it with more gracious understanding for each other, and see the human heart. Like, see that, I know for me, a real culture shift has been, even with this COVID situation, it's really hard for me to hear some of those polarized views when I know and had a good friend who was in the ICU for a really long time, fighting for his life. And when it becomes personal, when you realize there are stories, there are lives, there are people here that are being impacted, and I'm hurting with and alongside them, it kind of melts some of that other stuff away. And I don't mean to be Pollyanna about that, but I do think we can make certain things really ultimate that really then miss our opportunity to connect and really evoke real change and real dialogue that could really be healing. Mm-hmm. So do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just think that the theme kind of comes back to, again, go back to the title, The Revolution Starts Within. It's about being careful not to jump on a bandwagon on either side, to really sit with your own truthful experience, checking in with yourself, and then going back to what I said at the beginning, having the conversations, asking the curious questions, listening with empathetic ears, having that compassion for yourself, always knowing your intentions are good, we hope, that our intentions are pure, and that it's the stumbling that moves us forward. And then just to repeat what you said, that all change, when I talk to women about transition, change, and you talked about grief, it's always about something has to die for something new to be born. It's just hard when you're living in the middle of the hard. Right. But it is to eventually lead to something great. We hope, right?
Something new, something different, something like that next chapter of discovery. And I think we can get so stuck in rigid thinking patterns, and it's not necessarily because we're not teachable. It's often because there is fear about wavering on one side or the other, like the fear of the unknown. Sometimes it's easier to stay in what feels like a known unhealthy place than to move towards something that actually could be more life-giving, and really celebrating the gifts and the beauty of living in this multicultural world that we live in. I see it as like a bouquet of wildflowers when we can, we are all so uniquely made to do the work that we have before us. And what a difference that would be if we could celebrate that in one another. So I think that.
Yeah, so thank you. So to wrap up today, Sharon, first of all, I just want to thank you so much for jumping on my very first Zoom webinar. And I'm going to ask Clara to come back, because Clara's going to give us a little bit of information about kind of what's next. And but I have a couple really fun questions for you. Hi, Clara. Hi. So a couple really fun questions for you, Sharon, so we end a little bit more upbeat. So are you a salty or sweet girl?
I am a salty girl.
Okay.
In a good salty kind of way.
Yeah. What's the one thing you do to boost your mood?
Oh, I love to go for a walk. We live really close to a lake, and so I love to get outside and go for a nice 3-mile walk.
And what book are you reading, or what was the last book you read?
Oh, that is such a great question. So I am currently in the middle of, I have got a stack full of different books about trauma and all of the things, but I think one of my most favorite books that I keep pulling out on my shelf is called Redeeming Love. And it's this epic story of redemption by Francine Rivers. I keep going back to that one. So it's one of my favorites.
And then my final quick question is, what was the greatest gift you gained during stay-at-home time?
Oh, that is such a good question. The greatest gift I gained, I think it was realizing, and this is going to feel a little bit overwhelming because I don't necessarily love to be on camera or on a podcast, but realizing the gift of using my voice and the significance of showing up and providing webinars to the community in a way that I don't know that I would have jumped in otherwise. So that invitation to embrace the gift of that and just showing up, even though I was going to get it wrong and it was going to be super uncomfortable. But I think that was one of my biggest gifts.
That makes me so happy because before this, Sharon joined me at a 2-day conference to build a keynote speech.
That's right.
So, yay! All right, Clara. So we're at the top of the hour. So I just want to remind everybody that you can find Sharon at Kinsaku Roy Counseling. We're going to put a link in the notes for that. Also, I am doing discovery calls for women who are interested in. Maybe they're entering a transition. They want to explore, what's the next thing. So you can go to lzimmerman.com to sign up for a discovery call. And Clara, is there anything you wanted to share before we clicked end?
I am just so grateful for this conversation with you, Sharon. Thank you for sharing your heart and your wisdom with us. And be on the lookout for a follow-up email about Sharon and about Elle and how to leave a review on She Made It, because that's a really amazing way that helps us reach more women. And then you can be on the lookout for this podcast to release next week so that you can share it with people who didn't get to be here.
Yeah, and the end of June, we're going to do another live event. So, all right. Thank you, Sharon, so much for sharing. Thank you, Clara, for being here. And thank you to everybody who joined us.
Thank you. It's a gift.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm so grateful you joined us for today's episode. I bet you're here because you know there's something more for your life. Whether you're moving into something creative or letting go in order to take that next creative step, I have something for you. My free guide to graceful transitions. You can find it at lzimmerman.com/transitions. And remember, if she made it, you can too.